CityCast from Explocity.
It is very steep climb, madam, Joseph Raju warned Marcia as they prepared to set out. We must be careful, rocks are slippery. But he was not worried. Foreign ladies like Marcia didn't fall. It seemed they could do anything. They traveled alone from one country to the next. They trekked high and low without fear. They didn't send for the washing woman to have their clothes washed. They washed clothes themselves. They always smelled fresh and soapy, and they climbed rocks. All the same, he cautioned Marcia, we must be careful, madam. She didn't seem to hear him. She was busy writing in a small, black-bound notebook. Marcia was always jotting something down. Even when they paused briefly in their walk across the hot, arid riverbed strewn with boulders, she bent over the page, her rough, dry hair blowing across her face. Joseph, standing discreetly to the side, was looking down at the ground, but he saw the shadow of her hand as she tucked the errant strands carelessly behind her ear. The sight catapulted him into the past. The first time he had touched his Jiva's hair, it had been to tuck it behind her ear. They were in the church quadrangle, and a sudden gust of wind had whipped Jiva's white dupatta about her like a mainsail in the crosswind. Her cotton kurta clung to her body. Joseph had stood still, captivated. Then the dupatta set sail like the boats in his native town departing for the open seas. Jiva giggled and Joseph ran after the piece of cotton. By the time he brought it back, Jiva's hair was like a cyclone around her head, a heavy black silk cyclone, alive and seductive. Unable to resist, Joseph had caught a strand of that piece of her and tucked it behind her ear. All this time later, he could still feel its weight on his fingers, the thick, silken, fluid weight. Jiva giggled once more and stepped back, her eyes brilliant with excitement at his boldness.
Every famous author, Hemingway, Virginia Woolf, Toni Morrison, Marquez, and the many before and after them, has written memorable short stories. The short story has long been celebrated as an important part of literature, and in my view, any effort to defend it as such is unnecessary. My guest today is Indira Chandrasekhar, a writer of short stories. She is also a scientist and an editor. I have known Indira for many years. We were in college in Bangalore at about the same time, but the similarity ends there. Indira made something of college and went on to a doctorate in science and became a bio-physicist, like Jagdish Chandra Bose or James Watson. But evidently, she likes what I do better. So she quit messing with membranes and macromolecules, and about 12 years ago, she started a literary magazine called Out of Print. Out of Print is published once in 3 months and is online. Each issue carries fewer than 10 short stories with a focus on writing from the Indian subcontinent. Carefully curated, every one of the short stories in each issue is a tribute to craft, skill, style, and of course, storytelling. The 10th anniversary anthology of Out of Print is available in bookstores and was a delight to sink into, as was her book of short stories, Polymorphism, and that passage you heard in the beginning was Indira reading from Polymorphism. And now, to discuss science, literature, and the polymath nature of old Bangalore, it is my pleasure to introduce to you my old friend, Indira Chandrasekhar. Welcome to the Literary City.
Thank you so much, Ramji. Really an honor and a pleasure. I'm thrilled to be part of this.
My question is not how a scientist came to edit a literary magazine, but how someone with a destiny in literature fell to science.
Oh, that's a good question. Well, first of all, I wonder if my destiny is indeed literature, but here I am now living it. Yes, regarding biophysics, I was actually always fairly good at science, not super brilliant or anything, but, and I enjoyed it and I found it exciting. And I found conceptually the ideas of working on molecules that that are really involved in living creatures, keeping living creatures alive, making living creatures who they are. That was always very interesting and sort of exciting to me. Of course, the reality of working in science is not always about large concepts, but about small bits of data. But that's, I think, how I sort of veered into science.
And what was your thesis about?
I'm going to deviate slightly to say I'm also an editor, as you know.
Right.
And one of the things I haven't gone back to look at as an editor is my thesis, because I worry intensely that I'm going to find a huge number of proofing errors. But I was a computational chemist and a molecular biophysics person. And so my thesis was about, had two parts. The primary part was looking at membranes. Membranes are these intensely fascinating, complex containers of the cell, so without the membrane, really life as we know it wouldn't exist. All the things that make us into living creatures would just be floating in some uncontained, unbounded primordial pool. And so these membranes really contain you. And so it's very interesting to look at the way membranes actually regulate cell behavior and life in that sense. And so, so I was looking at, I was a computational biophysicist looking at the behavior of membranes and trying to simulate them on the computer. And I did a little bit of work on DNA as well.
And does it have any application?
It did, not immediately. I was not application oriented. I was working in an era also where fundamental science was highly regarded. And so you knew that ultimately the knowledge that you were adding to the pool of knowledge would find resonance in application.
And the next phase of your life, out of print. When was out of print?
Yes, it was in 2010, in September, that we brought out the first issue.
Literary magazines are famously and fashionably print, but you went online. Was there a reason?
The economic crisis hit at the end of 2008, if you recall.
Boy, do I.
But in 2008, the literary magazines, many of which one respected highly, from the US primarily, many of them run through university funds, became very strongly online. Presence became much more evident. And so I think there was a certain validity that the economic crisis brought to this idea.
Why a literary magazine?
It came born slightly out of selfishness and self-focus.
Good things always came of that.
I don't know, Ramji, but yes. So I had moved back from living outside of India to India. Mm-hmm. And when I started writing, and I found that there were very few magazines really that I could place my fiction in, my short fiction in.
And what was wrong with the ones available?
When I was trying to place my work outside of India, primarily in the US, when you submit as an Indian, there is a tendency for people to look for something of the exotic, for you to be sharing some flavor of your country, of this, this faraway tropical world. And really, I was an urban Indian writer writing about things that weren't particularly influenced by setting per se. Everything is influenced by the politics and setting of where you are, but they were not about describing it to someone who didn't know this world. They were about describing one's internal reactions to this world. And so I think I also felt that a literary journal based out of the subcontinent would be able to negotiate that in a more intelligent and natural way.
You appear to have placed a large emphasis on translations from regional language publications.
Yes.
Was that a stated mission?
I was exploring short fiction from the subcontinent, and short fiction from the subcontinent that's written in languages other than English is a very rich world. It's a long history of short fiction, and to not have that be part of this platform seemed absolutely untenable, really. But the thing is, of course, it's a journal in English, so we had to find a good translation. So yes, it was an implicit part of the mission, which was to provide a platform for short fiction from the subcontinent.
Why?
Yes.
Do you believe that Indian language writing doesn't get enough airplay?
It's a question of how you look at it. I think, for example, for a Kannada writer, there's a huge readership.
I would have thought so.
Yes, there's a huge readership. But when you step outside, unless it's a really well-known writer or something happens to make their work be translated, they may not be read outside the Kannada readership, for example. I respect and I'm so grateful to the people who bring translated fiction to out of print. Yes.
It's possible to tell a translation that's good, even without knowing the source language, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. Yes. Very, very true.
Is there a larger purpose to out of print than what you do as a literary magazine?
Oh, that's an interesting question. Yes, I think there is. I think there are multiple aspects to the larger purpose. One is the archival or documentation. You're capturing the way people were thinking, the issues they were dealing with, the problems they were facing on personal and political levels. Fiction is a very powerful way in which to express an opinion and a very powerful way in which to be an activist. It's telling you people's reactions. It's telling you the way people are feeling and responding to an oppression or an injustice. And so I think, therefore, you're providing a space for the subversive voice. And I think that is...
I think you just summed up the whole Soviet canon.
Yes, indeed.
Solzhenitsyn and all. I found your writing to be both disciplined and precise. So is that the scientist in you coming out? And do you ever have trouble letting your imagination fly?
So yes, it is some of the scientists coming through, but I don't think I ever had problem, even as a scientist, letting the imagination fly. And so some of my stories are based out of science. I'm very influenced by the questions I asked then and continue to ask.
So you're saying you can coexist as a scientist and fiction writer. I think there's a word for this. Polymorphism?
Well said, well said. That was clever, Ramji.
Always at your service. I noticed a discernible difference in your writing style between out of print, its anthology, and polymorphism. In polymorphism, you seemed a little more open, a little more vulnerable.
That's a very good point. I think, yes, that's probably actually very profoundly true. When you're writing fiction, you are sort of excavating yourself and your thinking. You are exposing yourself. You are just being an artist and laying out the rawness of it.
Now, as an anthologist, is there such a word, or did I just make it up?
If you made it up, it's the perfect word.
Okay, I'm not going to gaslight the grammarians. So, as a putter together of short stories, according to you, what makes a good short story writer?
Oh, that's a really tough one. For a short story writer, you really have to be able to reveal something about this often single character or single situation or single story, thread of a story, always impacted by multiplicity of everything around you. But you have to be able to sort of narrow down on that and unravel it, reveal that without getting too distracted by everything around, really, really focus in on something. But having said that, I do have some wonderful short story writers whose works we've published who, in fact, have like a whole novel in there, like a multiple things happening all over the place and a huge number of characters and everything's going crazy and there's chaos everywhere. And there's there's still sort of this incredible short story, this incredible ability to understand a little world or a situation that you can make happen. So essentially, there's no rule, but you just need to be able to grasp the form in order to be able to do what you want to do with it.
Speaking of the form, let me quote from Stephen Alter. Alter said, "The novel was a purely bourgeois literary form, a construct of 19th century nationalism. In contrast," he said, "the short story was a more egalitarian genre of fiction accessible to everyone." Is Stephen Alter calling short stories plebeian?
I don't think that's what he means. Plebeian, not accessible. Yes, I mean, I think that's very clever. I don't know if that's entirely true, because I do think, yes, I do understand the idea of the idea of nation giving rise to a sort of nationalistic drive to write about one's world. People often think because it's short, you can just read it, but the accessibility doesn't lie in its brevity. The accessibility lies in the fact that it's allows you to see that world. But I'm not quite sure I agree that all short stories are that easy to comprehend.
I have found that many, if not most, short stories that I have read from the Indian subcontinent are excessively self-referential and devoid of depth, or they're rewrites of stories from mythology, and we have so many stories in our mythology to rip off.
I think, like with any creative art form, you have to work very hard at the craft of it. Lack of craft is something that really comes through very, very strongly. So many people, I say young people, but I think people in general, have this great urgency to tell a story, about themselves, or tell a story about their world, tell a story about something that's disappearing that they feel the need to talk about. And in that urgency, yes, I think often you do come across some badly written works. Yeah.
I really enjoyed the anthology.
Oh,
and in it, your introduction was one of the most readable pieces in the book.
Oh my, thank you. I'm not sure my writers will be so pleased, or my writers.
Speaking of your writers, there were two other pieces that stood out for me in the book. One was the short story by Kurali Manikavale.
Oh, yes. That is such a brilliant piece. Yes, yes.
After reading that piece, I Googled her and read more of her pieces. Good stuff.
Yeah.
And the other piece was about the art, art of your covers, which was written by Mira Brunner.
Well, first, in the interest of transparency, I have to say she's my daughter. So
Cool.
I'm, of course, terribly excited and proud that you should say you like that.
I liked her piece.
Yes. Oh, how nice. Well, she'll be extremely pleased. And she is an artist, and also has a very strong sort of literary sensibility and ability to read a story and like it, dislike it, strong critical point of view. And in addition to which, of course, she's an artist, and which is why I thought she would be the right person to comment on the covers and out of print.
I'd like to bring up this author, Laura Elvery. Have you heard of her?
I don't know her work, really.
She wrote a book called Ordinary Matter, which is a collection of short stories inspired by the 20 times that women have won the Nobel Prize. But there's another reason I assume you'd identify with it.
Yes.
You have 2 Nobel laureates in your immediate family, Sir C.V. Raman and Subramaniam Chandrasekhar.
Yeah.
Not many people in the world who can swan around saying they have 2 Nobel laureates in the family. How are you related to them?
So C.V. Raman was my father's uncle, my father's mother's brother. And my father, who was a scientist as well, was Raman's first student, in fact, at the Raman Institute. And he was very young then. My father was 17 or something.
Incredible.
Incredibly young. Another brother of C.V. Raman, one of the other siblings, his son is Subramaniam Chandrasekhar, and he is, so therefore, my father's first cousin.
Are they the ones to blame for your going into science?
Perhaps, yes. I mean, not consciously. I didn't say I too want to win a Nobel Prize. I think I knew fairly early on that wasn't going to happen. But I was living in the world of science. We were attending all kinds of exciting lectures that were geared for lay people in all of the scientific institutions in Bangalore, which, was a very rich part of Bangalore culture in quote unquote old Bangalore.
To that we yearn.
Yes. And so I think it seemed like a natural thing to do.
Here's the other thing that would have influenced you. From all I've read, they were very literary people.
Yes, yes.
In fact, one famous scientist, how do you say this name? Hans, Bethe.
Better, yes, yeah.
He said of Chandrasekhar, Chandra was the greatest master of the English language that I know. Do you know why he would have said that?
Well, I have to say he was. I mean, both Raman and Chandrasekhar, actually also my father and other uncles and so on, they had a mastery over language, and they had a mastery over their ability to communicate. I mean, their lectures were all very brilliant, very different in character. I mean, some were explosive and exciting. Others were considered and elegant. And yes, so language was a very, very core part of the way in which, of their personalities, yes. And perhaps that was part of the polymath aspect of the way in which people grew up in, other eras. When teaching was not so siloed, you were always exposed to multiple things in your education, I think.
I guess curiosity wasn't dead then.
Oh dear, yes.
You mentioned that you started out of print because you found the need and there weren't too many places to which you could submit your work. But I just Googled, where can I submit my short stories in India? And the internet threw up a list of 38 names. That's a lot, isn't it?
That is, and it's exploded since. And when we finally started out of print, there was just one other, if I'm not mistaken, literary magazine that was online. And within the first few years already, a huge number came up.
So is there a critical mass in these things? Okay, I can't resist. Are we approaching the Chandrasekhar limit?
Ooh, nice one. But that has a role to play, because he said for a lot of young writers, you don't have anywhere to publish, and it's so hard to get your work noticed. And then if you're even that, the confidence that you get of even laying out your work on a little platform gives you that confidence. And if you are then really going to become a writer, then you start working at it and you aim for better and better literary journals.
I guess literary magazines that are discerning will find their own quality.
Yes. No.
So what's next for Out of Print? What are your plans?
Well, I mean, it relates very much to what you were talking about, which is having a discerning editorial eye. And we get, I don't know, 250, 300, sometimes more, sometimes less, submissions per reading period. I mean, we're reading all through the year. We sort of intensify over each quarter as we approach publication time. And we publish maybe 6 to 8 stories, right? I think it's in that direction. We'll continue to publish, of course, regularly, quarterly. And but I think we have talked about for a while, but really want to realize now, workshops for writers at different levels, entry-level writers, writers who are more established, who would wish for a good editorial input. I think it's at that level of mentorship and I don't know, to somehow to address the very issue you talked about quality and craft that we would like to put our energies
It's
into.
certainly motivating me. I'd like to write for you.
Oh, we would be so thrilled. Please do send us work, Ramji.
After plowing through some 10 or 12 different literary magazines, I can say that you're one of the most discerning, well, indeed one of the best.
Oh, thank you, Ramji. That is awfully generous of you, and I'm overwhelmed.
And on that note, Indi, connecting with you after so long was a complete pleasure. I really enjoyed our discussion.
As did I. Thank you. Thank you.
And thank you so much for being on the Literary City.
Thank you very much.
And I'll be back with What's That Word? Stay tuned. And I'm back with What's That Word? Where we look at words and phrases that we use all the time but never stop to think about. And to help me with it, here's my fun co-host.
Hi, my name is Praniti, but you can call me P. That's P with an A, not another E.
Hello, P with an A. Hey, say, listen, have you ever written a short story?
Yeah.
Fiction?
Totes. Absolutely.
On what?
All the food reviews I do for Explocity.
Oh, let's not joust with the fates, though.
But about this whole business of short stories,
Yes.
I only knew after listening to your interview with Indira Chandrasekhar that there are so many places that accept short story submissions.
Too many.
Yeah, I know. You said Chandrasekhar effect. That was very funny. But not many people might know the reference. So give us a quick dish, please.
The Chandrasekhar limit, by Nobel laureate Subramaniam Chandrasekhar, holds that if a star got, bigger than 1.4 times the sun, it wouldn't be able to exist in its own weight and it would collapse into itself. And there'd be black holes and all kinds of other messy stuff.
Yeah, so in this case, when would we know many literary sites are too many literary sites?
When there's not enough writer-generated gas to support the mass.
That would end terribly. How does it end again, your favorite phrase?
It all ends in tears. But hey, more part of the ones that succeed. All right, P with an A, what's the word today?
Short story.
More?
Yeah, I want to dig into the history of the short story, and then let's do some nice trivia.
To begin with, a short story is merely a story that's short. The question I ask myself, though, is what's the history of short stories? And I found information of epic proportions, volumes on the history of the short story through literature. So I'll just give you the short story version.
Yes, please.
The earliest record of short stories goes back to ancient Middle East, specifically the Epic of Gilgamesh. You know that one.
Yes.
Babylon, where they all sat down. Anywho, the earliest known short story in the form that we know short stories today, apparently, was in Egypt in 2000 BC, and the story was titled The Shipwrecked Sailor. Apparently, the author ended the piece on a positive note just to comfort the aristocrats of the day that shipwrecks are all not bad. And there have been other short stories like King Cheops and the Magicians, and a few centuries after came all the Indian short stories. The first known ones were from the Brahmanas, and then around 100 BC, the first of the Panchatantra tales.
Your problem is that Indian short story writers are still ripping off the Panchatantra? It's
not that I have a problem with adaptations of the millions of mythological stories that we have, but rather that this is becoming a substitute for originality and imagination, which are the lifeblood of literature.
Right.
But it does piss me off that they sound virtuous doing it. But maybe better that than stories of dearly departed grandpa and such rumination whilst sitting under the mango tree.
But how can the Epic of Gilgamesh be a short story?
Fair question. How can a short story be an epic?
Yeah.
You must have some sympathy. For one thing, it was written in cuneiform. Imagine the plight of the writer who has to dictate his work to a guy with a hammer and chisel.
Yeah.
You know, the writer goes home in the evening and he tells his wife, I got to get me a better typist, love. I'll tell young Tutankhamun that this is just not working out.
That's funny. But who would have thunk? I mean, who stops to think about the history of the short story?
Us, for one.
True.
There is evidence of the evolution of short stories right through literary history, but know this, it is all rooted in storytelling.
Yeah.
Right, think of early man and the nomads. Let's say they're sitting around a fire and nomad number one starts. It was a dark and stormy night. And then nomad number three puts down that dinosaur bone that he has been chewing and he leans forward in anticipation. The children stop chattering. One woman puts her hand on her face and peers through her fingers.
I'm rapt. Keep going.
One nomad child breaks the silence. And then what happened? And then the short story was born. And you know, nomad number one now had a deadline to finish the story.
Yeah. What was nomad number one's name?
Stan.
Like Stanley?
Oh, no, not at all. That dude did comic books, not short stories.
Who?
Stan Lee.
Oh, no. Groan. Boo.
What? And here I thought I was allowed one dad joke.
Okay, fine. But how short is a short story?
People usually ask the corollary. How long is a short story allowed to be before you can no longer call it a short story? But I like your question better. The answer to your question is no set length. But you know what? I've unearthed some really short stories.
Oh, good. Let's hear them.
For starters, did you know that Hemingway is said to have written a 6-word novel?
No way. What?
Well, there is some did he, didn't he arguments between experts, but here's the story. For sale, baby shoes never worn.
Oh, no. That's a little macabre, don't you think?
It's just a story. Someone said write a story and he went and pulled a Hemingway. I have another.
Okay, spill.
Guatemalan writer Augusto Monterroso wrote in Spanish, Cuando despertó, el dinosaurio todavía estaba allí.
Okay, and what does it mean?
When he awoke, the dinosaur was still there.
That's funny.
Umberto Eco acknowledged this to be the world's shortest novel. And I'm going to toss in this one about the Indian student, Siddharth, in North Carolina, in a college entrance exam, with lots of people vying for the same seat. He turned in just a 3-word essay. It was, I am macaca.
I don't get it.
Siddharth was on the campaign trail with George Allen, a senator hopeful, and as a student reporter. And in one public meeting, George Allen points at him deliberately and says, oh, there's Macaca, or whatever his name is, and let's welcome him to the United States.
Oh, no.
This whole thing blew up, went viral. Siddharth became very famous, and therefore that 3-word essay was accepted. But then George Allen lost the race, and everyone says it's because of this racial slur.
Well, today that senator would probably be celebrated.
Or so it would seem, wouldn't it? But anyway, hopefully this is just a passing phase of stupidity. But getting back to short stories, I have a few more. You want to listen?
Yes, please. That's fun.
Okay. All right, here's one from James Patrick Kelly. We kissed. She melted. Mop, please.
I like that one.
This one's from Richard Powers. Lie detector eyeglasses perfected. Civilization collapses.
Oh, no.
You know, newspaper headlines are the best short stories because they have to sum up everything in a few words. Did I ever tell you that many years ago I was invited to an editorial meeting at the New York Post, and I met the guy who wrote the headline, Headless Body in Topless Bar.
Wow.
The most famous headline. All right, and this one's from Eileen Gunn, and it goes, Computer, did we bring batteries? Computer?
No, no. Wow, you totally killed my interest in writing a short story. Thanks.
Oh, in which case, in honor of my killing something, I'll give you this last short story by Frank Miller. And it goes, "With bloody hands, I say goodbye."
Funny.
Okay, P with an A, now you come up with the shortest short story that you can write. Go.
Bye.
All right, that's our show. Thank you so much for listening, and tune in again next Wednesday when I'll be with William Dalrymple. Don't miss that one.